Tak będzie, nie?
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We start in just a couple of minutes now. Please watch and listen the video. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Anna Fotyga, Polish member of the European Parliament, and together with my colleague Adam Bielan, also Polish member of the European Parliament, we are happy to host today's events. Now we start a conference that we decided to entitled "Though if it be to die, we'll fight, and our deeds will live forever." This event is to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, having the commemoration that is the state event and today's both events, the conference and the opening of the exhibition that is to follow deliberations immediately at 12 are within the framework of state commemorations. I'm really happy to host in the European Parliament the guest of honor, Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, Minister of Culture and National Heritage, Professor Piotr Gliński. I'm happy to welcome here numerous representatives of missions accredited both to the Kingdom of Belgium and to EU and NATO. First and foremost, allow me to welcome His Excellency the Ambassador of Poland to the Kingdom of Belgium, Mr. Rafał Siemianowski. We expect also, and that is actually a very important part, taking into account challenging time, His Excellency the Ambassador of Ukraine to the EU, Mr. Всеволод Chenzov. I'm happy to welcome Deputy Head of the mission of the State of Israel to the EU, Mr. Jonathan Rosenzweig, as well as high representatives of missions of other countries, Lithuania, Czechia, Greece. I hope that I mentioned all diplomats. But first and foremost, allow me to welcome our very distinguished speakers during this conference, directors of key institutions, instrumental in organizing commemoration of 18th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the Social and Cultural Association of Jews in Poland, Mr. Artur Hoffman, the Polin Museum of History of Polish Jews, Mr. Zygmunt Stępiński, I'm very sorry, as well as director of the Warsaw Ghetto Museum, Mr. Albert Stankowski. We have important speakers, scientists, historians, writers. I will name Professor Grzegorz Behrendt, director of the Museum of Second World War, based in my constituency in Gdańsk. So particularly warm welcome, as well as the outstanding writer, journalist, member of the anti-communist opposition since his student time. So Mr. Bronisław Wildstein, also laureate of the highest Polish distinction, the White Eagle distinction. Unfortunately, we are able to host in remote mode, in pre-recorded statement, very important statement, the witness of history. But I can assure you, this statement is of utmost importance, and I welcome in just a moment after first speeches of my colleagues, my colleague Adam Bielan, and then keynote speech of Deputy Prime Minister. We'll listen to Marian Turski, the witness of history, chairman of the Council of the Polin Museum as well. Without much ado, I would like to open this conference by giving the floor to Adam Bielan. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I've forgotten to welcome Madame Monika Krawczyk, who is director of the Jewish Historical Institute. Very warm welcome. Thank you, Prime Minister, for reminding.
Thank you, Anna. Dear Prime Minister, dear Excellencies, Members of Parliament, honourable panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you in the European Parliament at the conference on the 18th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising that I have the honour to co-host today. I am glad to see our distinguished panelists and so many guests gathered to commemorate this event, all of whom being essential to this discussion on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Before giving the floor to our panelists, let me briefly mention two things. First, the memory. 19th of April will mark the 18th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a heroic act of resistance that exemplifies the untamable human spirit and the power of collective action. It is a day to remember and honour the brave men and women who fought for the dignity and freedom in the face of unimaginable cruelty and oppression. I am glad we can remember them not only in Poland but also here in the European Parliament as a symbol of what the Jewish community has endured and the past atrocities that cannot be repeated. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is a turning point in our history of the Holocaust when, in the face of overwhelming odds, Jews of Warsaw chose to fight back, to resist and to defend their humanity. Their courage and determination continue to inspire us today and remind us of the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the darkness of times. This brings me to my second point, the future. We cannot and shall never let this happen again. The uprising was a sorrowful event, but it has elevated into the everlasting representation of the Jewish people's resistance during the Holocaust. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was a message of hope to the world that the Jewish people would not go quietly into the night, that they would fight for the survival and for the values that make us human. It is a testament to the power of solidarity and community. Today, as we remember those heroes, we must reflect on the lessons of the past and the challenges of the present. We must honour their memory by standing up against hate, prejudice and discrimination in all its forms, all of which are a plague to our humanity. Before I pass the floor to Anna and Prime Minister Gliński, I would quickly like to apologise in advance for not being able to stay until the end of this conference and open the exhibition, as I am shortly expected at the Council for negotiations on future legislation. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję, Adamie. Szanowni Państwo, ja będę przeplatała polski, bo Jak Państwo rozumiecie,
Now I will
jest
speak in Polish,
tylu
because as
polskich
you
mówców,
may
że
well
wypada mi
know, there are so
zapowiedzieć
many Polish speakers
naszego
that I find it
głównego
only
mówcę,
fair to
gospodarza
introduce the next
uroczystości
speaker, the host of all
państwowych,
the
które będą
events
odbywały
that
się
will take place,
jak zwykle 19
on the 19th
kwietnia.
of
Tutaj w
April.
parlamencie
Here in
również
Parliament, we also
upamiętnimy,
will
będziemy się
commemorate
starali
the Warsaw
w ciągu
Ghetto
tego
Uprising.
dnia, kiedy to będą
And on the April
toczyły się obrady
19th,
plenarne
when we'll see the
parlamentu,
plenary session being
upamiętnić
held here,
wybuch
we will
powstania w
commemorate
getcie
the
warszawskim.
outbreak
Pozwólcie
of the
Państwo,
ghetto
że w tej
uprising.
chwili
Now
udzielę
let me give
głosu
the
Jego
floor
Ekscelencji
to His
wicepremierowi
Excellency
i
Deputy Prime
ministrowi
Minister
kultury
and
Rzeczypospolitej
Minister
Polskiej,
of Culture
panu
and
profesorowi
National
Piotrowi
Heritage, Professor
Glińskiemu.
Piotr Gliński.
Thank you. I was asked to speak in Polish, so I switch into Polish. Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen,
historia Polski obfituje w wydarzenia
history is rich
piękne i chwalebne, ale wiele też w niej
honorable
momentów
events,
bardzo trudnych,
but there are very many
skomplikowanych.
difficult moments and
pełnych
complicated, which are full of suffering.
Wiele z nich wydarzyło się od
Many of
momentu
them
utraty
have
przez
happened
państwo polskie
since the
suwerenności,
loss
kiedy to w
of sovereignty by
1795
Poland
roku
since
na
1795.
123 lata nasz kraj zniknął z mapy świata,
123 years Poland
brutalnie
disappeared from the
podzielony
map
przez
of the
państwa
world,
zaborcze.
brutally divided by the
W ciągu tych
partition
lat Polacy
powers.
niejednokrotnie
In those
starali
years,
się zrzucić
tried to
zaborcze jarzmo
get
i
rid
wybić
of
się na
this,
niepodległość.
yoke.
Zbrojna
and,
walka o
becoming
niepodległy byt
independent.
państwowy
They were
stała się
fighting,
doświadczeniem wielu
and it
pokoleń
was an experience of many
naszej wspólnoty
generations of our
narodowej, wywodzących
nation,
się z różnych grup
coming from
etnicznych,
different
kulturowych
ethnicities, cultural backgrounds
społecznych.
and social backgrounds.
Po krótkim, zaledwie
After a very
20-letnim
short
okresie
20
wolności
years
w latach
freedom period,
1918-1939
1918-1939,
w trakcie II wojny
during the Second
światowej
World
Polska
War,
znowu
Poland was
znalazła się
again
pod okupacją,
under the occupation,
tym razem niemiecką i
this
sowiecką.
time Soviet and
W
German.
tym czasie,
And during that
mimo
time,
ogromnych represji,
despite
nieustannego
huge
zagrożenia
repressions,
i strachu,
constant threat and
w
fear,
Warszawie wybuchły dwa
there were
powstania.
two uprisings in Warsaw.
Powstanie w warszawskim
There was a
getcie,
ghetto
którego 80.
uprising,
rocznicę właśnie obchodzimy.
which 80th anniversary
To
we're
pierwsze
celebrating now.
powstanie
It was the
wielkomiejskie i zarazem
big
największy
city and urban
zryw
uprising and the
ludności
biggest
żydowskiej w
uprising
trakcie niemieckiej
of the Jews
okupacji.
during the German occupation.
Kolejnym było trwające
The next
63
one
dni powstanie warszawskie z
Was lasting 63 days,
1944
the Warsaw
roku.
Uprising of 1944.
Część
Part
żydowskich bojowników,
of
którym udało
the
się
Jewish
przeżyć,
fighters
było
who managed
uczestnikami
to
tego
survive
drugiego powstania.
were taking part in the second uprising.
Warszawa jest zatem miastem
Warsaw
dwóch
is the
powstań.
City of two
To dowodzi, jak
uprisings.
silny jest
It
polski
proves
imperatyw w dążeniach
how
do wolności.
Strong is Polish
Niestety
imperative
moje
to
miasto,
get
Warszawa,
to
poniosło
freedom.
straszliwą
Unfortunately,
ofiarę.
Warsaw suffered
Ludność
enormously.
cywilna została wymordowana
Civilian
przez
population was
niemieckiego
murdered
okupanta,
by the German
a miasto
occupying
ostatecznie
forces, and the city
obrócone w ruinę.
itself turned into ashes.
Okres poprzedzający wybuch II wojny
The
światowej,
period before the
ale
Second
też jej
World War,
niezwykle tragiczny przebieg
its
pokazał
tragic
najdobitniej, że
consequences
znaczna część
have
Europy i
shown
świata
that many parts
skalana
of
była
Europe and the
antysemityzmem.
world was
Incydenty na
deeply
tle nienawiści
touched by
rasowej
antisemitism.
zdarzają się
Incidents
również i dzisiaj.
based on
Także w moim
ethnicity,
kraju, w Polsce.
race, are happening
Warto
even
jednak
now, also in my
podkreślić, że
country,
w Polsce
Poland.
mają
But it's
one charakter jednostkowy
worth
i przybierają zwykle
underlining
formę
that it's
bezmyślnych aktów
singular
wandalizmu.
events and
Akty te
acts of
zawsze spotykają się z
vandalism.
potępieniem
And they're very-
zarówno na poziomie
they're
państwowym,
always being condemned
objawiającym się
by
wyciąganiem
the state
konsekwencji prawnych,
and their legal
jak i
consequences
społecznych.
for the perpetrators and on the society
Należy
level.
pamiętać tu o
One
szczególnej
needs to remember
polskiej wrażliwości w tym
About
zakresie.
the special Polish sensitivity in
Na
that
terenie
respect.
Generalnej Guberni,
During
utworzonej
the
na
time of general
okupowanych ziemiach
government
polskich,
in the occupied Poland,
Niemcy wprowadzili
the
karę
Germans
śmierci za pomoc
introduced
Żydom.
the death penalty for helping the Jews.
Nie przeszkodziło to
And that
wielu moim
didn't
rodakom
impede
ryzykować
many of my
życiem
compatriots to
swoim i
risk
swoich
their
rodzin
lives and their
i nieść
families'
pomoc
lives and
żydowskim sąsiadom.
bring help to their
współrodakom.
Jewish neighbors.
Przykładem szczególnego heroizmu niech będzie postawa
one of
rodziny
the
Ulmów, z Markowa.
heroic examples could be the
Kierując się
Ulm
chrześcijańską
family from
postawą
Markowa.
miłości bliźniego,
They were
Ulmowie
guided
dali
by
schronienie 8
Christian
Żydom.
principles.
Dnia
They
24
gave
marca
shelter to 8 Jews.
1944
On
roku
1944,
Niemcy na oczach
the Germans
mieszkańców wsi zamordowali
in front of
małżeństwo Józefa i
all,
Wiktorię
the inhabitants
oraz
of
ich
the
7
village,
dzieci, w
killed
tym
and
jedno
executed
pozostające w łonie matki.
the
Zamordowani
married couple
zostali
and
także
8 of their children.
Żydzi, których rodzina Ulmów
Still
przechowywała.
unborn, and also the Jews.
W 2022 roku papież Franciszek podjął decyzję
1992,
o beatyfikacji rodziny
Franciszek,
Ulmów.
the Pope, has decided to beatify
Ulmowie i ich
the
żydowscy
Ulm
goście
family.
zostali
Ulm
zdradzeni
and
przez
their,
granatowego policjanta.
and the Jews they
Polskie
were
państwo
hosting were
podziemne
betrayed
wykonało na tym zdrajcy
by,
wyrok śmierci.
collaborating policemen. And the Polish
Natomiast niemieccy
underground
mordercy Ulmów i Goldmanów
state
nigdy nie ponieśli
executed
kary
them, but the
za swoją
German
zbrodnię.
executors of the Ulm family never suffered the consequences for their
W Polsce
crime.
nie ma przyzwolenia i miejsca na antysemityzm.
There is no
Żydzi w Polsce
place
mogą czuć się
in
bezpiecznie.
Poland for antisemitism.
Dobrym przykładem
Poland
reakcji
can
społeczeństwa
feel
i państwa
safe.
polskiego na akt
And one of
antysemityzmu
the examples
była na przykład fala oburzenia,
is
która
the
przetoczyła się
wave
przez
of
Polskę po
condemnation,
dewastacji cmentarza żydowskiego w Bielsku
which
Białej
happened after the devastation
w
of the
czerwcu
Bielsko-Biała,
2021 roku,
Jewish cemetery
gdzie
in
sprawcami
June
okazali się
2021.
bezmyślni 12-13-latkowie.
Perpetrators were
W
thoughtless
publicznej
youth of
zbiórce
12
na
and
naprawienie
13 years
szkód
old.
zebrano ponad
During the,
25 tysięcy euro,
public collection,
a Ministerstwo
they
Kultury
collected over
i
25,000
Dziedzictwa Narodowego
euros, and
przyznało
the Ministry
dodatkowe
of Culture
40
and
tysięcy
Heritage,
euro. Władze miasta zarządziły w ramach zajęć szkolnych dodatkowe lekcje z historii lokalnej ze szczególnym uwzględnieniem dawnego współegzystowania społeczności polskiej i żydowskiej. Rocznie w Polsce notowanych jest około 150 incydentów antysemickich. W tym samym czasie, chociażby w Niemczech, jest ich 15 razy tyle.
15 times more.
Antysemityzm należy zwalczać w każdej jego postaci. To, że incydentów antysemickich jest znacznie mniej niż w zachodniej Europie, nie znaczy, że możemy je ignorować. Przeciwnie. Należy im przeciwdziałać, na przykład poprzez edukację zarówno o Holokauście, jak i o wielowiekowym współistnieniu Polaków i Żydów. Państwo polskie przeznacza ogromne środki na upamiętnienie tragedii Holokaustu oraz na dbałość o dziedzictwo Żydów polskich. Tak, by można było przenieść tę pamięć dla przyszłych pokoleń. Niezwykle istotna jest tu współpraca z samorządami, organizacjami pozarządowymi, ale także lokalnymi aktywistami, zwykłymi obywatelami. Należy jednak podkreślić, że to po stronie rządu są nie tylko instrumenty finansowe, ale również prawne i legislacyjne wspierające te działania. I my te instrumenty wykorzystujemy. By uzmysłowić skalę wkładu naszego państwa i wzrostu nakładów w ostatnich latach na te działania, w latach nie najłatwiejszych, jak wiemy, pandemia, wojna, podamy tylko dwa przykłady. Ponad 150 milionów euro wyniosła łączna suma dotacji Polskiego Ministerstwa Kultury w latach 2016-2022 dla instytucji prowadzonych bądź współprowadzonych przez resort, których działalność obejmuje dbanie o pamięć, kulturę i dziedzictwo narodu żydowskiego na ziemiach polskich, a także upamiętnianie zagłady Żydów przez Niemców na ziemiach polskich. W samym tylko 2022 roku moje ministerstwo przeznaczyło ponad 25 milionów euro na instytucje kultury i muzea wykonujące zadania związane z dbałością o pamięć, kulturę i dziedzictwo narodu żydowskiego na terenie Polski. W porównaniu z rokiem 2016, w roku 2022 przeznaczono więc na muzea dwukrotnie więcej środków, zaś w roku 2023 planujemy kolejny wzrost do 36 milionów euro. Wśród instytucji tych znajdują się m.in. Państwowe Muzeum Auschwitz-Birkenau, Państwowe Muzeum na Majdanku z oddziałami w Bełżcu i Sobiborze, Muzeum Stutthof, Muzeum Treblinka Muzeum Grossrosen, Muzeum Getta Warszawskiego, Muzeum Polaków ratujących Żydów podczas II wojny światowej imienia rodziny Ulmów w Markowej, Muzeum Pamięci Mieszkańców Ziemi Oświęcimskiej, Muzeum Historii Żydów Polskich Polin, Żydowski Instytut Historyczny imienia Emanuela Ringelbluma, Muzeum Miejsce Pamięci KL Plaszów. To zarówno instytucje działające od lat, a nie wszystkie tutaj zostały wymienione, często niedostatecznie wspierane w przeszłości, jak i instytucje powołane w ciągu ostatnich lat w trosce o pamięć. Te nowe instytucje to chociażby Muzeum Getta Warszawskiego, Muzeum Polaków ratujących Żydów podczas II wojny światowej imienia rodziny Ulmów w Markowej, Muzeum Rodziny Rotmistrza Witolda Pileckiego w Ostrowi Mazowieckiej, czy Muzeum Pamięci Mieszkańców Ziemi Oświęcimskiej. Przypominam, że Pilecki, podobnie jak Karski, to byli ludzie, którzy pierwsi nieśli na Zachód w czasie II wojny światowej informacje o Holokauście. Należy również zaznaczyć, że nasz rząd jako pierwszy zainicjował i wdrożył projekt pierwszej pełnej inwentaryzacji i oznakowania wszystkich cmentarzy żydowskich na terenie Rzeczypospolitej Polskiej. Tego wcześniej nie zrobiono. Ten projekt jest realizowany we współpracy z wyspecjalizowanymi instytucjami kultury zajmującymi się tą tematyką. Narodowym Instytutem Dziedzictwa, Muzeum Historii Żydów Polskich Polin, Żydowskim Instytutem Historycznym i w stałej współpracy z Naczelnym Rabinem Polski, Komisją Rabiniczną do spraw cmentarzy, gminami wyznaniowymi żydowskimi oraz Fundacją Ochrony Dziedzictwa Żydowskiego. Przeprowadzona została również weryfikacja terenowa cmentarzy żydowskich w Polsce. Potwierdzana była ich lokalizacja, stan zachowania, kirkutów, czytelność historycznych granic oraz obecna funkcja. Wzmocniono też pozycję generalnego konserwatora zabytków, który między innymi troszczy się o ochronę cmentarzy żydowskich. Warto też dodać, że tylko w 2018 roku polski rząd przeznaczył 25 milionów euro na kapitał wieczysty dla Fundacji Dziedzictwa Kulturowego, która prowadzi wieloletnie prace porządkowe i konserwatorskie na terenie jednego z najważniejszych żydowskich cmentarzy w Polsce, przy ulicy Okopowej w Warszawie. Wreszcie po wielu latach ten wielki cmentarz uzyskał odpowiednie możliwości ochrony i restauracji. Pamiętamy o przeszłości i czerpiąc z historycznych doświadczeń chcemy budować lepszą przyszłość. Czcimy bohaterów powstania w warszawskim getcie. Oddajemy hołd niewinnym ofiarom niemieckiej machiny śmierci. Cześć ich pamięci.
Long be their memory.
Thank you very much for these insightful remarks, dear Prime Minister. Now I would like to invite you to listen to a video recorded by Mr. Marian Turski, Chairman of the Council of the Polish Museum of the History of Polish Jews.
Szanowni zebrani, bardzo mi przykro, że nie biorę udziału bezpośrednio razem z wami w obradach, ale w tym samym czasie już miałem wcześniej zobowiązania do udziału w konferencji w Berlinie na temat antysemityzmu. Wobec tego pozwólcie, że mój głos przekażę tutaj, a jest on poświęcony jednemu tematowi. Dlaczego powstanie w Warszawie wybuchło tak późno? Jest to temat do seminarium. Ja siłą rzeczy, ponieważ będzie to taki mini wykład, będę mówił skrótowo, może troszeczkę w sposób uproszczony i wyciągnę tylko niektóre przesłanki, niektóre elementy. Będą to 4 przesłanki, które chcę Państwu przedstawić. Pierwsza. Czy Żydzi w Warszawie mogli wcześniej przewidzieć? Można powiedzieć, wszyscy wiedzieliśmy, jaki los nam szykuje Hitler. Ale przy tym wszystkim, nawet jeszcze w roku 1938, po tak zwanej Nocy Kryształowej, po Kristallnacht, jeden z przyszłych realizatorów ostatecznego rozwiązania, czyli Endlezum Żydów, Heydrich, napisał prywatnie do swoich przyjaciół: jeszcze 10 lat będziemy musieli pracować nad tym, żeby się pozbyć Żydów z Niemiec. A więc on przewidywał 10 lat, czyli 1948. I wtedy dla nich pozbyć się, powiedzmy sobie otwarcie, jeszcze nie oznaczało eksterminacji. Oznaczało to: precz Żydami, niech wyjeżdżają, niech zostawią nam swoje majątki, swój dobytek, a wtedy niech sobie wyjeżdżają. A więc w 1941 roku po napaści na Związek Radziecki nastąpiła, i to już jest znana, przyspieszenie decyzji o rozwiązaniu tak zwanym Endlezum, czyli o eksterminacji Żydów. Nie wchodzę w to, bo to jest inny temat wielki. Faktem jest, że to nastąpiło nie wcześniej niż w 1941 roku, ta decyzja. Czy Żydzi w Warszawie byli jasnowidzami? Czy mogli to przewidzieć? W żadnym wypadku. Nawet, ja już nie chcę szukać analogii, kto mógł przewidzieć na miesiąc przed 24 lutego 1922 roku, że nastąpi mordercza agresja na Ukrainę. To było nie do przewidzenia nawet przez samych tych, którzy potem zostali nią dotknięci. Wracam do mojego tematu. A więc wtedy, kiedy się zaczęła wielka deportacja 22 lipca 1942 roku, kiedy większość mieszkańców getta potem przez najbliższe miesiące zostanie wysłana do Treblinki, zaraz potem, dzień potem zebrały się wszystkie liderzy, kierownicy wszystkich organizacji żydowskich z pytaniem: i co dalej? I to ciekawe, przedstawiciel młodych, Itzhak, jego Zuckerman, pseudonim Antek, wystąpił z następującym apelem do zgromadzonych. Cytuję z jego wspomnień. Zaproponowałem, by ci, którzy uczestniczą w spotkaniu oraz ich towarzysze, przywódcy społeczni, byliśmy w stanie zebrać kilkuset Żydów, wyszli na ulicę getta z hasłem: Treblinka to śmierć. Niech Niemcy wejdą i zabiją nas. Chciałem, żeby Żydzi zobaczyli krew na ulicach Warszawy, a nie dopiero w Treblince. I mamy zapis, notatki z tego zebrania bardzo ważnego. Sędziwi, przywódcy społeczności żydowskiej, godni zaufania, rabin Zysie Friedman, profesor Ignacy Szyper, wybitni przywódcy, godni zaufania, powiedzieli, cytuję: nie jeden raz naród Izraela zmuszony był do pogodzenia się z przelewem własnej krwi, by ratować rdzeń narodu i zapewnić ciągłość żydowskiego istnienia. Koniec cytatu. To było doświadczenie 2000 lat. Jak przeżyć w diasporze, jak przeżyć prześladowania, jak przeżyć wyprawy krzyżowe, jak przeżyć wysiedlenia, wygnania. To było takie doświadczenie. Od razu powiedzmy, 5 dni później zebrali się młodzi właśnie i postanowili utworzyć komitet antyfaszystowski, komitet walki i oni będą przygotowywali regularnie, już systematycznie przyszłe powstanie. Pierwsza przesłanka. Druga przesłanka, nazwałbym ją głodem albo choroba głodowa, disease, starvation disease. Krótko mówiąc, człowiek potrzebuje, żeby funkcjonować, około 2000 kalorii dziennie. Jeżeli ciężko pracuje, 4000 kalorii. Ja w getcie łódzkim dostawałem 700 kalorii dziennie. W getcie warszawskim przeciętnie dostawano jeszcze mniej niż 700 kalorii. W wyniku tego ludzie umierali z głodu na ulicach Warszawy, snuli się jak cienie, jak szkielety. I tu chciałbym powiedzieć jedną rzecz, którą przy tej okazji warto powiedzieć. Są choroby, które można odkryć w laboratorium. Gruźlicę, chorobę wścieklizny. Jest jedna choroba, której nie można odkryć w laboratorium. Jest to choroba głodowa. Ona wymaga szczególnych warunków, takich jak Hołodomor na Ukrainie, jak głód w Sudanie, w Jemenie, w Nigerii czy gdzieś indziej. I wyobraźcie sobie państwo moi, że zespół 20 lekarzy, 20, bo to były kobiety też, lekarzy w getcie łódzkim, w getcie warszawskim postanowił, że chociaż im grozi wszędzie niebezpieczeństwo, chociaż sami są niedożywieni, chociaż im grozi w każdej chwili wywózka, powinni dać ten wkład dla ludzkości, zbadać chorobę głodową. I przez wiele miesięcy robili zdjęcia, analizy, badania. W wyniku tego opracowali całą wielkie kompendium wiedzy o chorobie głodowej. To jest wielki wkład żydowskich lekarzy do wiedzy, do cywilizacji światowej. Ja o tym nie chcę mówić teraz, ale chcę powiedzieć o wniosku końcowym, jaki jest w tym opracowaniu. Notabene powiem, to jest rzecz bardzo ważna. Z tych 20 tylko 2 przeżyło i to jeden rok, a drugi 2 lata. Wszyscy inni zginęli. I teraz jaki jest tam wniosek o chorobie głodowej? Cytuję. Ustrój ginący z powodu długotrwałego wyniszczenia głodowego upodobnia się do gasnącej świecy. Życie zanika stopniowo, bez widocznych gołym okiem wstrząsów. Głodujący leniwieje. Jest skąpcem strzegącym z uporem resztek swojego stanu posiadania, to jest ostatnich zapasów energii. Wydatkuje je minimalnie. Ruchy są oszczędne, jak gdyby obliczone. Ich powolność lub nawet bezruch, trwający nieraz w ciągu dni, dążenie do pozycji leżącej, senność, milczenie, hamowanie odruchów, uśpienie psychiki. Oto pospolity obraz harłactwa, na którym głód wycisnął swoje piętno. Koniec cytatu. Dodam tutaj może jedną drobnostkę. Kiedy w Auschwitzu myśmy oczywiście nienawidzili Niemców, ale kto wie, czy bardziej nienawidziliśmy tych więźniów, Żydów, takich jak ja, którzy brali udział, chociaż byli do tego zmuszani, w tak zwanym komando, które szykowało Żydów do zagazowania. Myśmy nienawidzili ich, ale jeżeli ktoś był w stanie zrobić rewoltę w Auschwitz, to oni. Dlaczego? Bo byli silni, bo byli odżywieni, bo nie byli głodni. Co tacy jak ja mogli zrobić? To jest rzecz bardzo ważna do zrozumienia, jaki jest wpływ głodu i psychiki człowieka głodnego na jakąkolwiek aktywność. Trzecia sprawa, o której chciałbym mówić, to jest broń. Nie ma możliwości planowania zbrojnego oporu, gdy nie ma broni. Pozwólcie, że ja się ograniczę do jednego epizodu, ale on może pewne rzeczy wytłumaczy. Nie wiem, czy Państwu jest znane nazwisko Jan Karski. Oczywiście polscy uczestnicy tego seminarium znają. Jest to jeden z bohaterów II wojny światowej. To jest emisariusz rządu w Londynie, który parokrotnie przyjeżdżał do Polski, wracał do Londynu, przenosił wiadomości, został schwytany przez Niemców, podciął sobie żyły, bo bał się tortur, uratowano go, podziemie go uratowało. To jest długa historia. O Karskim na Zachodzie, w Ameryce napisano wiele książek, między innymi nazwano go człowiek, który chciał zatrzymać Holokaust. Skąd się to bierze? Kiedy Jan Karski przebywał w Polsce, miał kontakt z wszystkimi przywódcami poszczególnych organizacji politycznych i miał przekazać wiadomości od nich do Londynu. Między innymi domagali się od niego również przywódcy partii w getcie warszawskim. I on, na tyle odważny człowiek, poszedł do getta, nawet dwukrotnie poszedł do getta, żeby się spotkać z tymi ludźmi. A tam oni mu powiedzieli: panie poruczniku, mamy do pana prośbę, żeby pan ją przekazał wodzowi naczelnemu w Londynie, ale bez wiadomości komendanta głównego Armii Krajowej w Polsce. Pytał, dlaczego? Ponieważ będzie to skarga na niego. On nam nie chce dać broni, chociaż jesteśmy obywatelami Polski. Nam się należy. Szykujemy powstanie. On nam nie daje broni. Na to Karski powiedział mi: proszę bardzo, mogę to zrobić pod jednym warunkiem, że ja o tym jako karny żołnierz powiadomię dowódcę, jakim jest generał Grodno-Welski, ten komendant krajowy. Zgodzili się na to. I teraz miałem szczęście, że Jan Karski okazał mi wielką przyjaźń. Był moim przyjacielem. Mieszkał u mnie, ja mieszkałem u niego, pozwolił się nagrywać. Mam nagrania z rozmów z nim i zacytuję wam, opowiem wam fragment nagrania na ten temat. Powiada Jan Karski: poszedłem do komendanta i wytłumaczyłem mu, a on mi mówi: ja mam broni mało, ja muszę mieć tę broń na przygotowanie powstania w Polsce. Cytuję Karskiego: jakąś tam ruchawkę w getcie Niemcy zduszą w ciągu paru godzin. Przecież to nie będzie miało żadnego znaczenia wojskowego. Koniec cytatu, co mnie powiedział Jan Karski. I znów muszę przyznać, znów cytuję Karskiego z nagrania. Panie Marianie, on powiedział do mnie, mnie przekonały wówczas słowa komendanta. Ale dzisiaj mogę powiedzieć, że się okazało, że jednak powstanie w getcie trwało o wiele dłużej. A więc trzecia sprawa, broń. I czwarta, ostatnia, bo nie chcę zbyt długo zaplątać waszej uwagi, to jest coś, co nazwałbym odpowiedzialność za losy bliskich, odpowiedzialność za rodzinę. I znów posłużę się może jednym fragmentem wspomnień i na tej podstawie wytłumaczę, o co mi chodzi. W czasie jeszcze w getcie przebywając, a potem ukrywając się po stronie aryjskiej wśród chrześcijan, niejaki Marian Berland napisał pamiętnik, dziennik, diariusz, a właściwie dziennik, w którym opisał stan świadomości wtedy, kiedy oni się ukrywali w bunkrze. Tak, w bunkrach wtedy, w czasie powstania. On i jego żona, on miał 21 lat, żona 20 lat, byli silni, zdrowi, mogli rzeczywiście wiele rzeczy zrobić. Namawiano ich, żeby uciekli z getta gdzieś do partyzantki, gdziekolwiek. A na to on zapisuje, cytuję jego słowa. To dobre powstanie dla ludzi młodych, w każdej chwili gotowych na wszystko. Ludzi, którzy już nic nie mają do stracenia. A my, dla nas, całym życiem są rodziny. Całą pociechą fakt, że jesteśmy razem. Jeszcze nikt z nas przez chwilę nie pomyślał, aby się oderwać i szukać dla siebie samego ratunku. Czy możemy się ważyć z gołymi rękami, ze starszymi i słabymi kobietami na tak desperacki krok? Od razu na wstępie zginiemy. Dla nas istnieje tylko jedna możliwość. Czekać i jeszcze raz czekać. Rozwiązanie samo musi przyjść. Koniec cytatu. Moi Państwo, to co teraz powiem będzie okrutne, ale będzie prawdziwe. Trzeba było, żeby ci ojcowie i dzieci, i dziadkowie, i babcie, i kobiety, żeby zostali zagazowani i wymordowani, żeby ci, którzy pozostali, mogli sobie pozwolić na to, żeby szafować tylko własnym życiem. I wtedy wybuchło powstanie.
Ladies and gentlemen, after this statement, before I give the floor to our distinguished next speaker, allow me eventually one clarification, because we have mixed audience, some representatives of institutions and organizations know history of Second World War quite well. To some it may be a novelty. Poland, of course, was under occupation since September the 1st, 1939. But since also first day of this occupation, the resistance was overwhelming. So, when Marian Turski speaks about Karski and the government in London, it means government in exile. In Poland, it was what we call Polish underground state, comprising all institutions. And when Prime Minister mentioned the death penalty for treason, for giving Jews to oppressors, to Germans to be killed, together with Ulm family, it was the sentence of Polish state. And that means, so going to and through, it was commuting between the government in exile and Polish state under occupation of Germany. And maybe one remark, just a few days ago, during my visit to Washington, as usual, as every trip to Washington, I was able to lay a wreath on the grave of Jan Karski, the late Jan Karski, and that's joined grave together with his Jewish wife, Pola Karski. Now it is my pleasure.
There is no grave of Pilecki, for example.
Yeah, yeah. Allow me now to give the floor to our distinguished panelist, chairman, president of the Social Cultural Association of Jews in Poland, Mr. Artur Hoffman.
Szanowni Państwo.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marian Turski, as the one who survived the Holocaust, has told us many moving sentences as a witness to history, this tragic history. For me, who was born after the war and representing the association which, since its inception, a few months after the liberation, has been working for the Jewish community and Jewish memory, we have become the guardians of that memory. Willy-nilly, it's the choice of the genes. It's because as Jews we were born after the war and we had to remember about our history, 2,000 years of history, and the recent history that our parents lived through and had the luck to survive. 19th of April, for my generation, was a very important day and a celebration. Just like any other Jewish festival, it was quite close to Maccabean and Hanukkah tradition of all that uprising fight. In short, we young Jews, we didn't want to identify only with the victims. We want to be the fighters, just as those ones who raised their arms. And in every single of our clubs in the whole of Poland, there was a replica of Nathan Rapaport statue, and I met those fighters who were represented in our clubs, apart from all other luminaries. And this is applicable to whole of our generation. We would talk about those who were emigrating from Poland after 1968. This is the building of the identity of a Jew born after the war, which corresponds to this picture that I've just presented, those that were fighting. And that reminds us, just like when the Jewish state was building up, associating it to the resistance and fighting, the situation when we think about the soldiers, Jewish soldiers in Polish uniforms who were fighting in the September campaign, 1939. In the Jewish cemetery there was a quarter for the Jewish soldiers fighting the Germans in the September 39 campaign. And we must remember that in the army that was coming from the east and conquered Berlin, because the Polish soldiers conquered Berlin, there were Jews, and they were telling us about satisfaction when they reached Berlin. And that is associated with heroism of the risers in Warsaw. It was parallel to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in the Polish forces in the West, in the very pride moments of Monte Cassino. There were Jewish soldiers there, and those, of course, that were murdered in Katyn. Few hundred of Polish Jews as Polish officers were murdered by Soviets in Katyn forest. For us, it was very important, because very often we even blamed the generation of our parents that they were too timid in going to death. Their families were loaded onto trucks as cattle. And this comparison, which appeared in the Jewish poetry, in those who were fighting with their biros, they were mentioning that there was this dichotomy in the Jewish soul after the war. But the new generation took the example of Mordechai Nielewicz, Frenkel, big Jewish heroes, and we were referring to them. And now our duty as the Jewish Association in Poland, in this huge sea and ocean of ruins, because Warsaw was an ocean of ruins, a totally destroyed city, and there were symbolic pictures taken after the Second World War from bird's eye view of the ghetto, where there was only a remnants of St. Augustine's Church there, which was in Warsaw Ghettos area. And we have, and you should bear that in mind, that the first monument in Poland, in Warsaw, was the monument commemorating the ghetto risers. There were the bricks being paid by the community, and it was the first monument which even then incited a bit of jealousy and this and that. But we know what the situation in Poland was, because nobody in the communist Poland wanted to remember about the Home Army and those that were fighting in the Warsaw Uprising. For many years there wasn't a monument to the second Warsaw Uprising. We had to wait for it for very many years. Many Jews that survived the ghetto uprising and managed to get to Aryan side were fighting in the Warsaw Rising. There were Jews from Hungary and from Greece. They were liberated, and they were fighting the Germans later on in the Warsaw Uprising. And what I think is very important to note, what we have observed quasi-politically when we're observing the commemorations in front of those monuments for many years, when we were the witnesses who was there, who wasn't there. The socialist government, Soviet Polish government and other Soviet countries weren't paying tribute. Brezhnev never came there, Khrushchev never came there, Honecker never came there, but instead it was a historical moment when in 1970 Willy Brandt, the German Chancellor, went there and kneeled in front of that monument, and that picture spread across the world. The communist authorities in Poland were never showed it. Only Volksstimme, the only Jewish niche publication in Poland, printed that picture. And coming to the end, mentioning the hymn of the Jewish hymn, starts with the words, "Never say that you are going in the your last way, your last route." And this is what has been inscribed in our identity, which we identify with very strongly. Very soon there will be huge commemorations in front of that monument in Warsaw, and we must say that, well, you are talking about anti-Semitism in Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, when the official commemorations are done, the representatives of governments and embassies have paid their tributes, and it's the afternoon, in the evening, normal, ordinary people, Warsawians, come there. And the director of Polin can confirm that. And that's wonderful, fantastic, where the people with their families, with the children, are coming and individually pay tribute to the Warsaw Ghetto Risers. Nobody is ordering it. It's an instinct of solidarity, respect, and this is very valuable for us. When I, working with these people who were preparing this meeting, European Jewish Association, I very often talk about Jews in Poland, in our country, and people do not believe that we can function openly. We can present our history, our recent history, our long tradition and culture. Michel Gurary was a witness when we were setting up a meeting, and I forgot that in our club, which is on the main street in Warsaw with a Jewish star, with a Yiddish inscription, there is a group of young people, youth, who in our try and our efforts to teach about the Holocaust, educators from Warsaw Ghetto were educating young people. And in Białystok there were young people from Sosnowiec, Częstochowa, Jasno, Będzin. There will be people coming and learning. Of course, the education is not the best across the world amongst the teenagers, but we must say that my generation was well educated, and Polish youth certainly will be well educated and will get to know this, and they are eager to know this, and they want to know the history of Poland and the history of Polish Jews. And I think this augurs well for the future. And we will be organizing the Marches of the Living. This is what we've been doing, and we will be doing, and we want the most of the Polish youth to take part in it, because it can't be just the memory of the Polish Jews. There is very few Jews in Poland. We are talking about few thousand people only, and there are many elderly people amongst them. But when we talk about the numbers of commemorations, those happy ones and those sad ones, when we're organizing different events in various places, in small places, it's safe and secure, where the Jewish culture is well received. Everybody who thinks otherwise, we invite you over to have a look yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman. Now I'd like to give the floor to our next distinguished speaker, who is Mr. Albert Stankowski, Director of Warsaw Ghetto Museum.
Thank you.
The museum was established by the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage in 2018. The primary historical, educational, and public mission of the institution, located in the very center of Poland's capital city, is to present the fate of Polish Jews with a particular focus on the Jewish population in Warsaw. This fate can be told from various perspectives, each of which is legitimate and historically correct. But the museum's narrative is determined by the fact that it is built on the site of the former Warsaw Ghetto, in a building that in itself is a historical site. The unique architectural ensemble of the former Berson and Baumann Children's Hospital, which houses the museum, has accompanied the Jewish community of Warsaw since the late 1870s. The history of the building spans many chapters, beginning with the Children's Hospital and ending with the site of the struggle for life in the Warsaw Ghetto. After the deportations of Jews from the ghetto and the liquidation of the ghetto, the hospital building played a role in the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. In 1946, briefly, it served as a place where for the first time researchers of the Central Jewish Historical Commission worked. The rich, multifaceted history of the building focuses and symbolically comments the fate of Jews in Warsaw from the late 1900s to the post-war period. Before the tragedy of Holocaust, Warsaw Jewish residents had for centuries been an integral part of the city and its history. The museum undertakes the mission of popularizing history and commemorating the human loss, material loss, cultural loss, and spiritual losses by using not only an authentic historical building, but also using authentic historical objects from the Warsaw Ghetto. We make use of both traditional media and also modern technologies. Holocaust museums, by depicting the fate of the Jewish community, usually describe three aspects: a description of a regular Jewish life, the extermination process, and models of resistance, including armed resistance. In the Warsaw Ghetto Museum narrative, the main emphasis is placed on the life of the Jews in the ghetto and their efforts to preserve their way of life, nurturing their religion, culture, and values, regardless of the restrictions imposed by the German occupiers. The section devoted to Jewish resistance in particular highlights precisely this kind of widespread resistance of Jewish society during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943. This message resonates deeply with the main narrative of the main Ghetto Museum, being the museum dedicated to the history of Jews as individuals, as families, and finally as a community and society during the German occupation. Conducted in this way, the story makes it possible to appreciate and realize the importance of such all human values as tolerance, compassion towards minorities, dialogue between religions, ethnicities, and nationalities. Raising awareness of the importance of these values and the devastating consequences of anti-Semitism and racism is the universal message of the Warsaw Ghetto Museum, a message that must be remembered especially in these times, in the face of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Now allow me to give the floor to our next distinguished speaker, Mr. Zygmunt Stępiński, Director of the Polin Museum of History of Polish Jews. And with one remark, with this presentation, I would like to pay tribute also to a person who was really key and extremely important in creation of this museum, the late president of Poland, Lech Kaczyński, victim of Smolensk catastrophe. Sir, floor is yours.
Szanowni Państwo, serdecznie dziękuję.
Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for inviting me and for making it possible to take the floor today. 2 words by way of introduction in terms of the museum and the format by which it has been established. This is a public-private partnership set up by the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage, together with a Warsaw local government and the local Jewish associations. Hardly ever do we see such a situation when we see various interested parties that they cooperate and they do not quarrel. Like the minister previously said, the author and the initiator of the idea was Lech Kaczyński, who cooperated with Waldemar Dąbrowski, a former communist. So these 2 guys from the opposite sides of the political spectrum made up their minds, they set up the whole structure, and they built the museum very quickly. So they kept their word. When Lech Kaczyński was elected the president, and afterwards when Mr. Duda was elected the president, Mr. Duda said that this is the museum that should be visited by every pupil and student in Poland. They should be educated right from the very start of their education until they leave school or university. And this is one of our target groups, young people. And this is the biggest target group. We organize special classes, special seminars for them. We do realize that a journey to Warsaw for some of them may be too expensive, therefore we organize special exhibitions also all around Poland. We set up the so-called mobile museum on the wheels. We visit the former Jewish shtetls, where we saw Jewish communities being simply murdered. So we visit these places, we talk to young people, we commemorate all these people who died there, and we make sure that they remember. Just like most of my colleagues, we today are carrying daffodil pins. This is the sign of commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. This is the 11th edition of this festival, this campaign. We encourage hundreds and thousands of children to participate in special classes and courses organized by Polin Museum. We organized them in schools. We also managed to bring together hundreds of volunteers who distribute those daffodil pins, and thus we commemorate thousands, millions of Jews who lost their lives in the Second World War. When we organized this daffodil campaign, the awareness and the visibility of the Warsaw Ghetto was only known to 36% of the Warsavians. Now it's 95%. Now we are moving into Poland. We want to spread the word around. We will visit all the major cities that were the centers of the Jewish communities. Namely, we will visit Białystok, Lublin, Krakow, Łódź, and Wrocław. And moreover, thanks to the cooperation with the Jewish Congress and with Mr. Lauda, we organized the campaign in 115 communities, Jewish communities around the world, where we'll distribute more than 100,000 daffodils. Last year, the hashtag Together We Remember was sown by 100 million people. Hopefully, we will manage to double this number. Now, a couple of words on how we want to commemorate the dramatic anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We wanted to focus on a certain group. The Germans were met with heavy resistance, but at the same time there were 50,000 civilians located in shelters, in underground bunkers, people who were left for many weeks. For weeks on end, they prepared in special hideouts. Nobody knew where the ghetto uprising would rebel, so they prepared special shelters, special hideouts to simply resist German forces. They set it up at a time of loneliness, despair, thirst and fear, and their resistance in these hideouts, in these bunkers, counted in numbers, days, weeks. This resistance was as important as the resistance with guns in their hands. So the two types of resistance were very important. Nobody wanted to give up. So this exhibition touches upon very important dilemmas, namely attitudes, feelings, and we pose very important questions that we want to ask the current world. How do we face death? How do we behave when faced with death? What is the border between giving up and fighting for your life? What do people feel when they are marginalized, when they are surrounded? You know that you will not be saved. How can you counter the evil? How do you fight with the evil? How do you counter indifference? What does indifference lead to? What does it mean to be a witness? What does it mean to be a witness of suffering of others? And the last remarks. Since we are an indifferent museum, I would like to draw your attention to the war waged by Russia in Ukraine. It is an attempt to forcibly erase Ukraine from the map of the world. They want to seize the territory that is an integral part of the Ukraine. I want to draw your attention to the monstrous crimes being committed against civilians. Watching the dramatic images on a daily basis, we are entitled to ask whether we do enough to support Ukraine and could more be done. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękujemy za.
Thank you very much for these words, Director. These are the contemporary situations and the lessons that we should all be drawing from history. This is a very serious part of our work, and I don't want to use any other words, but we could use those words for what needs to be done to show the world what's happening and what we should be facing. Please allow me to give the floor to Monika Krawczyk, the director of Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. Thank you very much. I'd like to apologize to the interpreters for not giving you even the conspect of my remarks, which would make your work easier, but I'd like to talk spontaneously. First of all, I'd like to warm-heartedly thank our Polish MEPs who were kind enough to take the burden on their shoulders and organize this conference and the accompanying exhibition, and the whole group of European Conservatives and Reformers group, because it seems to me that it is an anniversary about which we're talking about here, 80th anniversary, which is a symbol of civic resistance, armed resistance, of the people who were in extreme situation, the threat of life, and this symbol is important for the whole of Europe. And it's good that we are remembering about it here in this site of the European Parliament. European Historical Institute is named after Inge Blum since 2008. And since 2008, it's an institution which's been financed by the state money, state budget of the Polish state. And because of that, or thanks to that, we can continue with our mission, which has been started by the survivors of the Holocaust, Polish Jews, in 1947. And because of that, our institute is celebrating its 75th birthday anniversary, and it was the first institution in the world which was scientifically analyzing and studying the Holocaust. Emanuel Ringelblum was a historian, and in the Warsaw Ghetto came up with an idea to document the surroundings and what was happening from the Jewish perspective. He invited several dozen people, and this group grew larger and larger, so that to make a chronicle of the Jews under the German occupation, their faiths, and what turned out to be, and it transpires from the documents collected by that group, they were also documenting German atrocities. And those documents from Ringelblum archives that they all collected, it was about 35,000 pages of various documents. They were used in many court cases against the war criminals from Germany, also during Adolf Eichmann case, which took place in Jerusalem. Out of several dozen people who were taking part in this civilian resistance, because they didn't have any arms and they didn't have any ambition to become the fighters, they used a sheet of paper and a pen and pencil as their arms, or they copied documents or prepared documents. Out of that group, only 3 people survived. Only one of them knew about the hiding place of those documents, and through huge efforts, going through the sea of rubble, this dug-in treasure had been found, and in 2006 it was inscribed in the World Heritage List of UNESCO. This treasure is in our institute in Warsaw. It's available for the scientists, and practically one cannot study the Holocaust and the fate of Jews under the German occupation without referring to this source. Another source which we hold are the testimonies collected by Jewish committees in the 40s and the 50s. And this is a source, a first-hand source, testifying to what was happening in Warsaw during the German occupation, what was happening in Warsaw Ghetto. And thanks to our actions and what we do, education is one of them. We realize a project of publishing all of those documents in English. I have the 5th book of 38 in total, which are in Polish already, because we want this information, which has a universal value when we're talking about the war, the situation of the civilians, of the people deprived of the existence, really. These are the documents worth the memory of the world, and it's worth to draw conclusions so that the motto "No More War" is not just a slogan. I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for the invitation and for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we have in the chamber His Excellency the Ambassador of Ukraine to the EU and NATO. I think, can we ask you for just a few words to us? I think it is a very contemporary issue to speak about brave uprising in the Jewish ghetto located in Warsaw during the Second World War, and draw conclusions to contemporary time.
Thank you very much, the Minister, dear members of the Parliament, friends. It's a definitely big honor to be invited for this event, and I listened very attentively to the presentations, and it's you can every year we go through the same experience. We cannot get accustomed to the horrors of the Second World War and what was happening in Warsaw Ghetto, what was happening in the concentration camps. And I think it's our obligation to live through this experience, to make sure we remain human and we keep fighting against the evil, and we draw our strengths, our resources from those memories and from those examples of brave people being able in the most desperate situations to stand up and fight. And I definitely agree there are a lot of parallelism in what Nazis and modern Russian war criminals are doing in Ukrainian cities, in modern concentration camps, torturing people, depriving prisoners of war of food, and basically repeating the same type of treatment and attitude to human being. And also, we have brave people, and just yesterday we acknowledged them during the event, which together with organization Yellow Ribbon. It's about Ukrainian brave people who draw this red ribbon as a symbol of resistance and freedom in the occupied Ukrainian cities. And we need to support them and remember about them, and call people here in Europe, but I think which is even more important in so-called the global south and other regions where Russian propaganda is still strong and people remain very often indifferent. So it's our common task to make sure that the world wakes up and stop this war, make sure that Russia and Russian leadership is isolated, and we restore the international peace and order, and it's never repeated. And thank you very much for this opportunity to be here.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed, and be assured we remember about Yellow Ribbon as much as we remember about yellow daffodils, and will spread this knowledge. It was my privilege to participate in yesterday's event, and that is why I see so much parallel to our today's between our today's deliberations and earlier experience. Proszę mi pozwolić w tej chwili na...
Now, let me introduce Prodomosuo, another speaker and another institution localized in my district, in my city. This is the museum of my neighborhood. Let me introduce Grzegorz Berend, Professor Grzegorz Berend, Director of the Museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, in a natural way, most of the speeches focus on commemorating all the insurgents and heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto. You commemorate all the events from 1940 to 43. However, I would like to draw your attention to three other elements. First one was already mentioned by Artur Hoffman, namely, Polish citizens, Jewish Polish citizens, stood up and rose against Germany on the very first day of the Second World War. They were accompanied by millions of Polish soldiers who fought in September and October 1939. We were 70,000 Jewish Polish citizens who took up arms, and we saw thousands of them die in the first weeks and months of the Second World War. By the end of the Second World War, on the territory of Europe, we saw at least 100,000 Polish Jews in various formations, in various armies. Artur Hoffman mentioned those who in 1945 conquered Berlin. Let me remind you that from the east to Berlin we saw 16,000 Jews and 3,000 Jews died in years 1940-1945 and thus contributed to the collapse of the Third Reich. I am mentioning those people who were Polish citizens in August 1939. But let me add to these people thousands of those émigrés from Poland who would live in Palestine then, who lived in the United States, in England, in the UK, and they constructed a 1.5 million diaspora, Jewish diaspora, who took up their arms. And together they contributed to the fall of the Nazi German regime. This is the first element. The second element. It was in the eastern part of Poland from summer 1941, Germans started to exterminate Jews, Polish Jews en masse. The territory, therefore, 22 months previously had been occupied by Russian forces. Germans started to execute hundreds of thousands of Polish citizens, Polish Jews. These people were murdered in August, September, October. These people fell victim to Einsatzgruppen, Einsatzkommandos. In part, these groups also would look for local traitors to identify Jewish compatriots. This is very significant because Polish eastern provinces, as the first provinces, were faced with the National Socialist regime that focused on total extermination. Warsaw, Krakow, Lublin didn't know these atrocities, but Brześć, Nieswież, Lublin, Vilnius knew this method of total extermination, the method that was introduced in the summer of 1940. The conclusions that were drawn by Jewish Poles made them self-organize. It was an incentive to establish conspirational group. It wasn't easy because within the 22 months of the Russian occupation of these provinces, most of the local Jewish leaders were arrested by the Soviet Secret Service, by NKWD. Just to name but a few, some symbolic persons. We had Viktor Alter, Henrik Derlich, who unfortunately died in the prison. They were members of the Bund Association. Yet we had younger people, Menahem Begin, who luckily survived, and later he was part of the Polish armed forces, and later he was part of the Polish underground movement in Palestine. Despite all these losses, in some of the localities in eastern Poland, we saw local Jewish conspirational groups being established. And like Marian Turski said, they waited till the very last moment. But in the beginning of June 1942, when it was clear to everyone that Germans are moving into the final stage of the final extermination, these groups started fleeing and raising against Germans in several localities, in Vilnius province, in New Prussia province, in Polessie province, in Wołyń province. In several localities in these provinces, we saw the acts of armed rebellion acts that were conducted by the aforementioned members of these groups. Now, let me be the proponent and the champions of those who stood up against Germans as the first ones in June, July, August of 1942. Let me say the following. Before Warsaw, we had eastern provinces. In the east of Poland, Polish Jews, knowing full well what would happen with them, they stood up, they raised their arms, being conscious of all the limitations that were mentioned by Marian Turski. But in all these localities we saw an armed uprising, we saw an armed rebellion, and we saw hundreds of young, mainly young Jews, Jewish men and women who, before the war, were connected with the Zionist movement, stood up against German oppressors. Let us remember all these acts. And now let us draw a parallel with current situation. We are talking about people who should make us proud, both Poles but also Ukrainians today. Whether it is Tucheń or Krzemieniec Wołyński, these are the former Polish localities that are now within the boundaries of Ukraine. Now, third element that I would like to broach. The third thing that I would like to mention. I lead the museum that focuses on the civilian situation within the framework of the Second World War. Within this mission and within this framework, we inform people about atrocities, tragedies, and fight of all the Jews who gave up their lives when fighting with the Germans. Within the framework of our work, and all the members here who represent individual museums, within the framework of our activities, we see a specific alliance between individual museums and institutions. We cooperate with the academia, we cooperate with the governmental agencies and with local government agencies. We do not differentiate. If we are to talk about commemorating heroes and rebels, all the members of the aforementioned institutions come together. One of the examples of our collaboration in commemorating victims is yet another edition of the Festival of the Lost Culture. During the first edition, we had a pleasure and a privilege to cooperate with the Social and Cultural Association of Jews in Poland, who contributed to this festival, but we also cooperate with Jewish communities from our province, not only from our province but from other provinces. And this is a very good perspective, because thanks to this synergy of local governments, of the central government and individual institutions, we can commemorate all these people and we can raise awareness of all these atrocities and all the events that took place. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to give the floor now to a person who is very special in the contemporary Poland, a remarkable opposition anti-communist activist. For those who know Stanisław Pyja's surname and the resistance of the students in Kraków, And also for my generation, it's very important. Certainly, Bronisław Wildstein's activities will be obvious, and it will remind us of difficult period. A writer, journalist, laureate of the highest Polish order of the White Eagle in Poland, Bronisław Wildstein. I give you the floor. Thank you very much. I'd like to continue this, what Marian Turski started. Marian Turski started about the mission of Karski and the try to initiate some sort of help for the Jews in Poland to fight and combat the Holocaust. This mission was being supported or organized by the Polish government in exile and the Polish underground state. And Polish underground state and the Home Army were sending the reports about the start of the extermination of the Jews. There were regular reports being sent, and they were demanding intervention from the West. And this could have taken forms in various shapes and forms, like bombing the trucks, rail trucks, trains that were going to the concentration camps, partial destruction of those concentration camps, increase of the help and demanding from the West, or blackmailing the Germans to stop these actions, or partial. There were many proposals and suggestions, but the idea was first and foremost to make them known. And let's name a spade a spade. These actions faced the wall. Perhaps it wasn't indifference, but it was the wall. Perhaps those most conscious were replying in a similar now what the leader of the Home Army was answering, these types of answers. They said we've got our own war. We haven't got the means, but the difference was that the Home Army didn't have the means, but the West did have the means. But in many cases, it was a indifference. Karski met the President of the United States, Roosevelt, and his description of this conversation is shocking. Roosevelt is totally even bored and irritated about talking about things that he had no interest in. One has to remember about that when we're talking about this whole situation in Poland, because the situation in Poland was about the fact that Polish underground state and the Polish government in exile do whatever they could. The Jews in Poland were the Polish citizens, and because they were the people tried to save them as much as possible as the underground country could do. Those that were denouncing the Jews were sentenced to death, and not always these death penalties were being executed, but that existed. Of course, some arms were supplied to the ghetto. They had it from somewhere. So the ghetto uprising was organized by two groups. First, the Jewish Bund and Jewish military organization, a rather right-wing, which was in large part was created by the ex-soldiers and officers of the Polish armed forces. We need to realize that the Jews were fighting for the Polish independence. There was a huge exhibition in Poland recently. Jews, soldiers, patriots. And it shows the participation of the Jews in the fights, battles for the Polish independence during the First World War and after the war with the Bolsheviks of 1920. So this Jewish Fighting Association has raised two flags, one Jewish with the David Star and the Polish flag. Jürgen Stroop, who was putting down the Warsaw Ghetto from the Germans, was describing how they ferociously defended those standards, those flags, and at what cost. I mentioned those two organizations because I think this is in the past now. The left wing organization was being promoted, but at the cost of the other one. Now, when this memory should cut across the political divide, the justice should be done to those on the right side. From our perspective, it doesn't matter. Minister Gliński mentioned Warsaw as a city of two uprisings. Several months after the ghetto uprising, there was a Warsaw uprising of 1944. So ghetto, after the uprising, was razed to the ground. After the Warsaw Rising, the whole Warsaw was practically razed to the ground. Even more, the Germans were using the methods of extermination which they were using earlier against the Jews. They started to using against the Poles. And during the Warsaw Rising, there were about 200,000 victims who perished. But during the uprising, there was a slaughter of Wola district. It's not well remembered, but it's systematic extermination of the quarter of Warsaw where this uprising started. And now we estimate about 40,000 inhabitants were killed off systematically, house after house, quarter after quarter. From the youngest children to the oldest, and that's what the Germans managed to do. The fighters in the ghetto, because we're talking about those who were fighting in the ghetto, were aware of this, raising up the Polish flags and the Jewish flags, of what it meant. And we know very well that between the war period, the Polish-Jewish relations went quite harmonious in the Polish state. There were tensions. The Jewish minority was the largest in the whole of Europe, maybe in the world. Over 10% of the general population of the inhabitants of Poland. Part of them were people who were fleeing Russia and Russia pogroms, Litvaks, so to speak, who were totally unassimilated in the Polish society. So they were obviously foreign. So there were problems. It was evident, but it was a Polish state that was fighting for its citizens and trying to defend them during the war. And bearing in mind how important is that independent state, which is also the state of the Jewish Polish citizens, Jews who were contributing to the Polish identity during the long history. And for those fighters who were in the ghetto, who raised the Polish flag, it was obvious to them. And it's worth remembering about that. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give the floor to a representative of the European Jewish Association, Director for European Affairs, Madame Ruth Isaac.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Prime Minister, MEP Anna Fotyga, on behalf of the European Jewish Association, we want to thank you for the partnership. I want to say that every year, together with our partners, the TSKZ, we're in Poland for an Auschwitz delegation with MEPs and members of parliament from across Europe. And I hope the the Prime Minister would one day also join us, if obviously it's normally November, if your diary would allow for it. Your Excellencies, we heard a lot from distinguished speakers and historians, so I would not try to repeat anything. I would just very briefly use the few minutes I have to say that the conference is named, though if it be to die, we will fight, and our deeds will live forever. I think that sentence says everything. The heroes of the uprising knew that death was upon them, and yet they chose to fight. And they were fighting and willing to die against a hateful ideology of the Nazis. And they knew that the limited arms, the director of the Polin Museum spoke earlier about the weapons. So obviously they knew that the weapons they had were limited, and there was no chance for them to win, but yet they chose to fight. And against all hope and against all reason, they chose to fight. And the few minutes I have, I want to concentrate upon the courage which they showed, and that this courage should be an example to us behind. In Hebrew and in the Jewish world, when somebody passes away, we normally say, may their memory be a blessing, right? And there is a responsibility on the person who stays behind to carry that memory, because what they did was heroic, but it's up to us for the person who died and for all the work and courage and sacrifice that they showed. It's up to us to imitate their example and make sure that their blessing and their example doesn't go to waste. So as we're here, ladies and gentlemen, in the heart of the democracy of Europe, here in the European Parliament, we need to bear in mind that democracy and freedom cannot be taken for granted. This discussion and this exhibition serves as a reminder that we must all remain vigilant. It is something that is obviously freedom is worth fighting for. This is something that the Jewish people and we as an organization, the European Jewish Association, understand. And let us hope that the memory of these heroes will inspire others and ourselves to stand up to hate today, and no matter what the cost is, to be determined to fight for this generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now, last but absolutely not least, Pascal Falek, who represents policy officer, who represents the European Commission, coordinator for combating, among others, combating anti-Semitism.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister, honorable members of the Parliament, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to participate to this meeting today. Thank you for organizing this important event. Let me start with a quote of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in her statement for the International Holocaust Remembrance Day on 27 January. I quote, "This year will be marked by remembering Jewish resistance and insurgents in Nazi-occupied Europe. We'll commemorate the 80th anniversary of major uprisings like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising on 19 April 1943. Still today and forever, we can learn from the strength, courage and determination of these poorly armed Jewish fighters and partisans who carry out revolts successfully against all odds and an almost certain death. They fought in the name of justice, they were determined and to fight back." End of quote. The Holocaust is a defining legacy of Europe's history. In today's Europe, 34% of Europeans surveyed say they knew just a little or had never heard of the Holocaust. And we know that when the facts about the Holocaust are no longer known, Holocaust distortion is left unchallenged. We have seen, since the start of the military invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis, a rise of Holocaust denial and distortion, as well as old anti-Semitic conspiracy theories resurging. Anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust. It is still on the rise today and has taken new forms, including Israel-related anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is incompatible with EU values, And this is why the European Commission presented in October 2021 its first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. All EU member states committed in the Council conclusion of 2022 to also adopt national strategies on combating anti-Semitism by end 2022, and we are looking forward to receive and to welcome the Polish national strategy on combating anti-Semitism. I'm coming back to the EU strategy. Among its 100 actions, half have been set in motion. Many of them relate to Holocaust education, research, and remembrance. And this is extremely crucial as all societies are becoming more diverse, as young people have less attention span, and we know that the last survivors are leaving us. And despite the Holocaust being commemorated and taught in many EU countries, like in Poland today, a lack of knowledge exists still among the general public. So I'm going to now explain you a few key actions that we're going to put forward. One action of the strategy is to build a participatory Holocaust memorial in Brussels. To start this process, a dozen of EU representations, among which the representation in Warsaw, have held commemorative events and reflect on European remembrance last January. We will continue it, and we count on Warsaw also to contribute to this future Holocaust memorial in Brussels with branches all over Europe. We are also determined to find new ways of remembrance, and to do so, another flagship action is to create a network of sites where the Holocaust happened, such as hiding places, deportation places, killing sites all over Europe. We want to strengthen the connection between Holocaust sites, and sites located in Poland will have a major role to play in this network. And for this network to run on the long run, EU member states should also take a stake in the initiative. Another key initiative of the strategy is the creation of a network of young European ambassadors to promote Holocaust remembrance in schools, universities, vocational and educational training institutions. This initiative was launched as part of the 2022 European Year of Youth. Third point, we also made Holocaust remembrance a EU funding priority to the remembrance strands of our Citizen Equality Remembrance Values Programme, the SURF programme, with a dedicated budget of €10 million for 2023. The call is currently open, and I invite all of your organizations to apply to it. And I'm very pleased that this year, so the call that was assessed this year, we had many projects funded with many initiatives that are based notably in Poland, around 20 of them. And I know we have many partners that have applied successfully for EU funding. We also, as you mentioned, supported the We Remember campaign. The Commission also building headquarters was illuminated with We Remember last year. Also to mention that the Commission is supporting also many projects about the history of World War II in Poland in general, and not only and solely about the Holocaust. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, we will work toward an EU free from anti-Semitism and free from any form of intolerance and discrimination. We will ensure that every child learns about the Holocaust and that such atrocities will never happen again. It is Europe's long-term commitment to ensure that the memory of the victim of the Holocaust will continue. We want to pass on the lessons learned from the abyss to future generations. Thank you.
In particular of also personalities like Arthur Hoffman. I think that there is also a lot of lessons learned that European Commission may benefit from experience of Polish institutions in commemorating Holocaust and other atrocities perpetrated by German occupants on Polish territory. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to hurry to open the exhibition. Just in conclusion to words of Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, Minister of Culture, Professor Piotr Gliński.
I don't know if this is a conclusion, but it's just an intervention in an important issue. We are talking about very serious issues that humanity is based on, and the system of values that is defined or is defining the humanity. That's why this conversation, a heavy conversation with various points of view, narrations, has to be based on the truth. For me, as a representative of the Polish state, and also for a Pole whose family experienced unspeakable suffering during the Second World War. My grandparents, the 16-year-old brother of my mum, many cousins were killed or died from German hands during the Second World War. And we never heard about the Nazis as such. So please, when we talk about those very important issues, let's talk truthfully and not propagate an untrue term that the Nazis were occupying Poland, murdering millions of Polish citizens and European citizens. Over 6 million Poles, including 3 million Polish Jews, perished during the Second World War, perished out of German hands and the Germans. I beg you for the truth in these issues. Without the truth, the humanity has no future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for this conference. I think that we have to hurry to the level number 1, where and when we are intent to open the exhibition. Please.